Okay, so night 3 and 4. Night 3, I put him to bed at 6:40. His last nap ended at 4:42, so we're about 2 hours later. I put him to bed at 6:40 and he was crying. And then by 6:50, he started to calm down. He was doing his cry, stop, cry, stop. So what I mean by the cry, stop is he cries for a little bit and then he gets into his sleeping position where he just kind of turns his head to the side, rocks his head a little bit, and then he cries out a little bit, and then he rests for a little bit. And then 2 minutes later, he was crying again. And then 2 minutes after that, at 6:54, he was asleep. 14 minutes, and he was sleeping. Then 12 minutes later at 7:06, he was crying, but just very lightly. It's more like a whimpery whine. He's not really getting full-blown cry, but he's stirring again. And then by 7:09, he was asleep. So for 100% asleep, it was 29 minutes later. This night, he woke up at 11:34, which is not typical. That's very early for him to be waking up. But he just stirred very gently. He was gently crying. So this is just kind of like a mumbling whine that he has. And at 12:02, he was asleep again. So it was almost 20 minutes and he got himself back to sleep. Then he woke up at 5:20. And again, he was gently crying, doing his little mumble cry. And he was back to sleep at 5:38. And then he woke up again at 5:49, and he was crying this time. But he was back to sleep 15 minutes later at 6:04, and he slept until 7:01. So he's been waking up at 7 a.m., which even prior to this, what is a pretty typical wake-up time for him. And so by taking these notes, I've seen that over the last 3 nights, or the first 3 nights, he really struggles for between the hours of 4 and 6 a.m. It's a very typical time that babies and infants will wake up a lot. It's a difficult time for them to stay asleep. So that was a pretty good night. I mean, it wasn't horrible. He woke up a few times but managed to get himself back to sleep, and there was he got himself back to sleep very quickly, and there wasn't tons of crying. Then night 4, which was last night, that was a rough day for naps, and I'll talk more about that in our nap videos. So he went to bed at 6:33 that day, and he was asleep by 6:36. Like, before I even got all the way downstairs and turned the monitor on, he was asleep. This boy was exhausted. And he stayed asleep. I thought he was going to have a terrible night because, like I said, he had a really bad day for naps. It was a rough day. But he stayed asleep, and he woke up at 4:13. And again, he was just doing his mumbling, whining cry, where it's not right out crying. He's just stirring and trying to get himself back to sleep, and he got himself back to sleep by 4:20. So that was awesome. He was up for 7 minutes. And then he woke up at 6:03. So this was a tricky time because he was typically waking up around 7 and he was up at 6. And he was awake, and he was awake for a moment and just kind of looking around, and then he started crying. So my husband and I quickly decided that we're pretty sure this was going to be his wake-up time. I didn't really see much sense into letting him, his cry was telling me that he was awake. He wasn't doing any of the motions that he does when he tries to get himself back to sleep, though we didn't give him very long. I had figured, since he went to sleep a little bit earlier than he normally does, by about a half an hour or so, but I didn't want to let him cry and cry and cry and him go back to sleep for, I don't know, what, 20, 30 minutes maybe. Maybe he would have went back for an hour, but together we made the decision that he was awake then. So we got him up and nursed him, and he was, after doing so, I was glad that we did, because he seemed awake. He wasn't very groggy. Even as he was nursing, he was alert and looking around, and after about 5 minutes of nursing, he was babbling a little bit to me, but not too much. He was pretty hungry. So I'm glad that we made that decision. So he was up at 6 o'clock this morning, which, you know, isn't bad. If his wake up window is anywhere between 6 and 7 a.m., I'm okay with that for now. And I think that this will just improve as time goes on. Training is going really well. We are progressing in the right direction. Though I did just get an email from the Sleep Sense program. They send you daily emails, and a couple of them I have found helpful, and this one was just warning that night 5 tends to be regression night. You know, you're just starting to see improvements and things are getting better, and then boom, you hit a wall and kind of thrown back a little bit. So I don't know, we'll see. It's going to depend on how today goes, which so far is going absolutely terrible. But like I said, we'll talk more about that in the nap training videos. So we're doing great. Night 3 and 4, we're good, and we're headed in the right direction. If you found this video helpful or like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to continue seeing on how our sleep training journey goes, then consider subscribing. Thanks.